Welcome to the Why Not podcast with me, Chrissy Hawkins. In a world where everybody always asks you why, I'm here to ask why not. I'm going to do that by breaking down the mindsets of guests and my own to figure out what makes people say, why not? Hi guys, welcome back to Why Not. So today I'm talking to Emilia Thompson, who is a nutrition coach who works primarily with people struggling with disordered eating. So today we actually talk about the difference between eating disorders and disordered eating, how she kind of came into this role working with people like this, and kind of say things in the fitness industry that kind of perpetuate the disordered eating and kind of almost in a sense glorify it, and how these are things that are kind of harmful now and we need to kind of move past them. And then we kind of talk about, just little things people can do or people find helpful when struggling with this. That obviously it is not a blanket statement, so there's different things that help different people, but these are the kind of things we talked about today. And as ever guys, just sit back and relax or walk and listen. Here's my episode with Emilia Thompson. So, hi guys, welcome back to Why Not. So today I have got Amelia Thompson. So if you don't know her, she is a nutrition coach, and I'm actually going to let Amelia tell you a little bit about herself. So welcome to the podcast, Amelia. How are you?
Thank you. I am well, thank you very much. Okay, I will do like a Cliff's Note version. I am a registered nutritionist and I run a coaching team to support people in their relationships with food and their relationships with their bodies. And I also run an online education course called EIQ Nutrition with Emma Gordon, and that is a course designed to support personal trainers to educate themselves on nutrition, but also to develop a much more compassionate and holistic approach to health and nutrition. And my background is I have a PhD in exercise physiology, and I used to be a university lecturer, but not so much anymore. And I think that's it.
Oh, deadly. So how did you get into nutrition in the first place?
I did sports biomedicine at undergraduate, and I had a teacher, a lecturer who I loved, who was a professor in sport nutrition, and he inspired me to do it. So then I went off and did a master's in sport and exercise nutrition. And so I kind of just went into it through my studies, and then I lectured in a nutrition department at university for 3.5-4 years, and I developed a sport nutrition program. And then I went into, I've always been into health and fitness, and so I competed in bodybuilding for about 4 years. And when I was going through that process, I recognized that the knowledge of the fitness industry at that time was not very evidence-based at all, especially within bodybuilding. And so I started to kind of marry the two of my studies and my personal experience in fitness. And then I kind of just fell into the space that I'm in now, because nobody spoke about disordered eating at all, which is predominantly where my coaching team focuses.
Yeah. Did you find there was a lot of that in bodybuilding, a lot of disordered eating?
Yeah. It's something that's not spoken about very often, but bodybuilders as a whole have an increased risk of disordered eating, an increased prevalence of disordered eating versus the general population. And that's partly because of the type of people that it attracts. There's a lot of crossover between personality traits between people with eating disorders and people who fall into bodybuilding. So things like extreme perfectionism, sometimes narcissism, these kind of certain traits that cross over. But then on top of that, bodybuilding as a sport, or any extreme dieting, even without bodybuilding, is very much obviously aesthetic focused. So you're constantly surveying your body, constantly body checking every single day, constantly exposing yourself to subjective feedback on your body. And on top of that, as you get leaner with any sort of extreme diet, your biological drive to eat increases. But at the same time, you're not allowing yourself to honor that because you are dieting. And so what often happens as soon as you finish dieting, you finish competing for that season, your biological drive to eat is at its highest. You have often developed quite rigid food rules throughout your bodybuilding prep. You're obsessed with your body and yourself to some degree. And so it all kind of comes together to create a really toxic environment for your relationship with food. So it's super common, and it's spoken about more now, but it certainly wasn't 5 years ago when I first started competing. That wasn't 5 years ago I competed from 2014 to 2017, and we're now 2022. So I finished about 5 years ago.
Okay. Did you find that happened to you at all?
Yeah, massively. That's why I went into it. So like I said, when I did my first season, so you do like a extreme diet and then you have like an off season and then you do it again for a number of years. And so when I did my first prep, I had a coach at the time, and I knew he did warn me. He said post show was quite tough, but I didn't realize just how tough it was. And as soon as I finished, I was regularly overeating to some degree. I would say I was binge eating. I would compensate for my eating with exercise. I hated my body. I just had a really toxic binge restrict cycle with my food for quite a while. And every time I did a competition prep, it got easier and easier because of the work that I did around it, around like mindfulness and compassion and other things, where I tried to incorporate that in. But at no point was it smooth sailing. Even in my last show was the easiest, where I stopped tracking straight away and it was not so bad. But there was never a point with competing that I finished that season and wasn't in some way negatively impacted in terms of my relationship with food or my health.
And was it hard to reverse that when you decided to stop competing?
Not for me, not hugely, because again, I did all the work all the way through it, but I wouldn't say that my relationship with food was healthy until about a year after I finished competing. So I think people often think that your relationship with food should just be good and should just be quote unquote normal, but it doesn't really work like that. You have to put in the work. So it took a year of me not dieting. It took a year of me focusing on healthful habits and things outside of my body and outside of myself to really kind of restore that relationship with food. But it did take quite a while. I didn't find it too hard, to be honest, because again, I'd done the work, but I know that it's a really, really hard process. And had I tried to stop competing a year in when I hadn't had the experiences that I had and hadn't looked at the research that I had, then I would have found it a lot tougher. And I work with clients now who it might take a year or two for them to really get out of that headspace.
Yeah. Did you think that having the research and looking at the research helped you, or was it really kind of more something you had to work on, like emotionally?
It's both, really. Like any sort of coaching, you need to take the evidence and then you need to apply it to the individual with the right behavior change strategies, right, with the right kind of more holistic approach. So I needed the research because I didn't know that it was common to binge eat after dieting. I didn't know that that was a thing, even though I was a nutritionist. No one had ever told me that. So when I did my first show, I remember looking up binge eating and practices to help binge eating. It was nothing to do with competing. And I found a lot of mindfulness-based interventions and nobody was talking about them. So I didn't have a choice but to use the research to look at what I was doing. And I mean, I'm sure people were talking about them outside the health and fitness space, don't get me wrong, but there was nobody there at the time that was. So I would look at a research paper, and I was at a uni at the time teaching, so I had access to all this stuff, and I would look at the protocols used in the research and I would just try and use them for myself, or I would adapt them in some way for myself. And I learned about mindful eating. So it wasn't just about obviously reading the research, but it was about me saying, right, now I know this is the research, how can I incorporate this into my life and make myself more mindful and foster a more positive body image. And that process for me was about evidence-based practice on myself before then I could say, right, I'm going to coach in the same way and take the stages that I went through and use them within a method, which is the method that I use now with clients.
Yeah, I suppose it helped you kind of being used to reading research. It helped you to take that information out as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a scientist to my core, so it's rare that I'll do anything that's not evidence-based. There are some exceptions to that, like I have crystals, like there's no evidence there, but that's more of a faith thing rather than I would never say to one of my clients, you know what you need is a rose quartz or an amethyst. I would never apply that stuff.
Yeah, I get you. So like, would you say like dealing with that yourself is what brought you to dealing with eating disorders with people?
Well, I don't work with eating disorders. I work with people with disordered eating. And I think that's super important to recognise that if you have an eating disorder, you need to get clinical support for that. That's not a job for a nutritionist or a personal trainer or a coach. But it certainly is. I naturally fell into that because when I went through that myself, and it wasn't just through bodybuilding, I had disordered eating habits for a long time, and bodybuilding gave me a safe space to control that. And then, which was not healthy, but I didn't know any different. And then because I started speaking about it a lot more on my social media, I was writing blogs about it, and because no one was doing it, especially in bodybuilding, it was like naturally those types of people that were going through the same things would gravitate towards me and ask me for support with it. And initially it wasn't something that I would do because I just didn't have the experience or the understanding of how to do it, but it certainly is the reason why I fell into it in the end, because it was just through me being super open and authentic with what I was going through that ended up being the reason that I work with people that I do.
Yeah. Would you be able to explain the difference between eating disorders and disordered eating? Just because I'm not sure if people would know the difference.
Sure. So can kind of think of it as a spectrum. So on one end of the spectrum, you've got kind of optimal relationship with food, super health. When I say super healthy, I don't mean eating super healthy. I mean a super healthy relationship with food. And then on the other end, you've got eating disorders, which are things like bulimia or anorexia that have very specific criteria that you meet in order to be diagnosed with those. So I don't know them off the top of my head, but the DSM-5 states those specific criteria. And then in between that, like there are more than obviously those two eating disorders. So there are about 5 or 6 named eating disorders. But between those two extremes, there are people tend to sit on that spectrum of maybe they have a good relationship with food, but they've got some disordered habits. So maybe they struggle to eat out socially, or they track a lot of their food and they struggle to not track their food, or they're obsessed with body checking and exercise to burn off calories and things like that. Those are all disordered habits. And the extent to which your habits negatively impact your life is going to be different for different people. And some people might be further down the spectrum where they are regularly overeating, but they're not binge eating. And you feel quite preoccupied by food, but they don't meet the criteria for eating disorders. So they might be at one sort of further down the spectrum, and then someone else, like I said, might just have a couple of little things that they're not super comfortable with or confident with their relationship with food, that might be more up the spectrum. So disordered eating is kind of more anything that takes up an unnecessary amount of your time or contributes negatively to your life. Those would be classed as disordered eating habits.
Do you find people with those kind of disordered eating habits find it sometimes harder to accept because they don't have a definite, like, say for instance, they're not anorexic or they're not bulimic, they just have a few things, so they're like, no, I'm fine, there's nothing wrong with me?
Yeah, I think the thing is with disordered eating habits, generally we adopt them for a reason, and we feel that they serve a purpose for us, even if we don't want them. So for example, overeating can serve a purpose for people that maybe don't feel comfortable to sit with their emotions or recognize the feelings that they're experiencing, so they might use food to suppress those feelings. So I think it's really important when we look at these things to approach them with a really compassionate mind, so that we're open to understanding why we have these habits and accepting why we have these habits, because there's no way of changing them if we don't accept them in the first place and kind of keep an open heart and mind towards that. But on the other side of that, I suppose some people don't want to leave them because they think that they're useful. So example being not being able to keep certain foods in your house because whenever you have them you overeat on them. That is a disordered habit, and a lot of people will probably think, well, it's not a big deal, I just won't keep that food in my house, which is all well and good until you have children, or until you are with your family, or you end up moving in with someone else. How do you deal with it then? And so people think, well, it's just not a big deal. It doesn't, like, it's not a medical issue, so to speak, that needs cured, but it's certainly something. All of these things, if they are if you don't feel that you have full, it's not even about control, but a full autonomy in your food choices, and you're comfortable in your food choices, then it's something that you deserve to feel. And your disordered habits are not helpful to you, even if you convince yourself that they are, not in a healthy sense anyway.
Yeah. Do you like the process of like helping or kind of breaking away from these things? Do people expect it to be quite linear, or is it generally like it is kind of something that takes time?
People, again, both. So I certainly wouldn't like to generalize. For some people, they can work on their relationship with food for their whole life, like realistically. And I think that if people don't get the support, sometimes that is the case. And for some people, it almost becomes a bit of a livable with situation, and that's tough, and that's a really tough situation to be in. But I do believe that most people can get to a place where food is not negatively impacting their life as a whole. But again, people with eating disorders, I'm not really classing that within this conversation, because it's a mental health condition, and it's a mental illness. Some people, if it's something small like tracking, for example, some people can just go, right, I'm just going to phase it out. And within a couple of months, they phased it out and they feel fine eating without counting calories, and that's great. But for other people, no, if it's something like overeating, it can take a long time to break free from. And then often you get people who manage to stop overeating regularly, but occasionally, every now and again, if they're going through something really stressful, they maybe have a week where they overeat, and then they feel like they're back at square one. But it's like that happens, and it's normal for your body or your brain to go back to the strategy that it's most comfortable with to help you manage feelings. And so I think it very, very much differs. I've had clients work with me for 3 months, which is rare, to be honest. And I have clients who've worked with me for 4 years, and I've only been going for 5 years. So, you know, it's different for everyone, I think.
Yeah, I suppose the reason I'm asking is I kind of see that with the fitness industry, you know, they kind of expect like they do the 6 weeks and whatever the amount of time and everything will be sorted and they'll be grand, when it's not really like that. You know, you kind of have to keep going. You don't just do like an 8-week program and that's you sorted for life. You still need to work on it all the time.
Yeah, and I really dislike that. I really dislike this idea that your health can be improved in 8 weeks and then that's completely it. And this is the problem in fitness, especially. We confuse fat loss with fitness, fat loss with health, fitness with health. We get these all things all confused, and a complete health overhaul is going to take more than 8 weeks, because health is much more holistic than body composition. And for a lot of people, it's actually not got anything to do with body composition at all. But it's the only way that we know initially how to change our health is to change our bodies, and the fitness industry certainly perpetuates that. And I love the fitness industry a lot, I really do, but transformations and 8-week programs and 8-week challenges and stuff like that, they really, it's marketing. It's not there to help you, it's marketing. It's there to make people money. And I understand the drive when you are on social media and you see someone to post a transformation picture or tell you can get something in 8 weeks. We are a nation or a generation of people who love instant gratification. Like we want everything quickly. We order food and it's there within 15 minutes. Like, we want everything quickly. And so I understand the pull to these types of things, but they're not there to serve you. They're there to serve the coach themselves who's doing that program, because it's illogical to think that you can change your life and your healthful habits within 8 weeks, especially if you're 35 years old and you've spent the last 20 years developing them. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, I find that as well. One thing I was interested in as well, those transformations, you never see them 6 months later reposted.
Yeah, exactly that. And I did a post on this yesterday, actually, because a lot of the time those clients come to me because that coach will be using their body to sell their transformation, but at the same time that client is now working with me because they've got a really bad relationship with food, or they've regained the weight that they lost in that transformation picture, but that transformation picture is still out there making the other person money, and it's being used as inspiration for other people. And that to me is really sad. And I don't really know how we counteract it other than talking about it as much as we can.
Do you find there's definitely not definitely, but there's a big lack of knowledge when it comes to relationship with food and working on that when it comes to like fitness coaches? Because you were saying yourself you do a program for them.
Yeah, I think there's two problems. I think one is lack of education, which is why we started EIQ Nutrition, when we talk about all of this stuff. I think that's the first thing. And to some degree, you can't blame personal trainers, because the nutrition that they get in their personal training qualification is crap. They don't get any behavior change information or anything about habits. They get like the very basic stuff and sent on their way. So to that degree, it's like, you can't blame them for coming fresh out of a course and not understanding this stuff. But 5 years down the line, if you've not done any CPD to support yourself and you've not done any of these types of courses to learn, then it is your fault now, and you are a health professional. And I think that's the thing, is we are health professionals to some degree. We're not nurses, we're not registered health professionals, but we certainly are working with people to support their health. And I think sometimes we work beyond our scope of practice. I say we as a collective of personal trainers. I think there's certainly that problem too. But then I also think that some people know better, they just don't do better because they care more about themselves and their money and their success and their ego. And there's a lot of ego in the fitness industry. And, you know, this is a conversation I have with my business partner all the time, is that I hate to generalize here, I really, really do. But at the moment, especially, we're going through a phase of male egos in the industry really stifling change, because it's just kind of like, who can make the most money? And that's what marketing is for. And there's nothing wrong with marketing and selling your business. We all have to do it. We all are here to support people first and foremost, but we have to make a living off that. But I think that at the moment, especially, and it's kind of diet culture as a whole, to be fair, we focus more on making money than we do on helping people. And that is a huge, huge problem. I know coaches that know better, but they just don't do it because it doesn't work for their bank balance. And that's really sad.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. Like, you know, it is the things like those 8-week transformations that sell better than saying, let's be sustainable and let's try and work on, you know, you don't have to work out 7 days a week. And, you know, there was one thing I saw recently as well, and they were looking for comments on is it 75-day hard challenge? Have you heard about that?
No, what is that?
It's a viral thing on TikTok, because obviously it's gone viral, but basically the rules are you pick a diet, any diet, stick to it, and then you have to work out twice a day for 45 minutes, which is and one of them has to be outdoors, and you read 10 pages of a non-fiction book a day, which I'm like, okay, everyone could do doing that. Drink a gallon of water a day or something like that. I think they're the main rules of it, and it's like, yeah, that's great. Now what do you do after 75 days?
Yeah, that's the point, right? Because actually, as a whole, I could think that, well, maybe you go for a walk for one, and then you go to the gym, and like almost I can be like, most of that I could almost get on board with. But you're exactly right. That's not about behavior change. It's like, you do these things and then get to the end and then stop. But actually, it's after that stop point is where people need the most support, because anyone, realistically, if you really had to, you could follow a meal plan, realistically. That we don't make cognitive decisions when it comes to food. We make emotional decisions most of the time. So we need to have habits in place and easy kind of options in place and non-negotiables in place, so that we know that when we get emotional and we can't think necessarily straight, so to speak, we have those things in place to help ourselves. But again, these types of programs, some of them do, you know, some 8-week programs will say, let's put these 8 habits in place, but it's not enough. It's just not enough. I think it's wrong.
Yeah, no, same. I did, like, I responded to thing on that, and I was like, okay, that's all well and good, and you will get results, but what do you do after? And that's like the biggest thing. I think, do you think, like, do your clients come in thinking that they can do this in a certain amount of time, or you always straight up, look, this is going to take time, we don't know how long it'll be?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I should really say here, like, I know a couple of coaches who run a sort of 8-week programs, but the idea is that it's a sort of 8-week initial block, and then they do some more after it. So, and I think in that situation, like, that can be really helpful. So I certainly am not bashing like all. Oh yeah, like, there's definitely a place for some of them. It's just the extremes of it. I have to talk about this quite a lot to clients on social media. My coaches say it all the time, like, it's not an 8-week fix, because especially the type of work that I do, we're unpicking things, that habits that have been learned 15, 20 years ago, or we are literally unpicking all of the cultural narratives that you've got about what a body should look like. We're unpicking all of this stuff that you expose yourself to for, I don't know, however many hours of the day of people commenting on your body. So if you scroll on social media, you know, it's something that's really topical now is like dieting for summer. And it's like, we can just take that as an example of like, why do you want to diet for summer? Because I'm going on holiday, but why? Because I want to feel good in my bikini. But why don't you feel good in your bikini as it stands? Because I know I should be smaller, but why? And it's like, really question that. And it's like, well, because everyone should want to be smaller, but why? And that's so cultural. And it's this idea that, well, of course everyone, like, the leaner the better when you go on holiday, but again, why? And it's like, there's nothing wrong with dieting for your holiday, and for a lot of people as well, it's probably going to improve your health if you're in a larger body, say. But for a lot of people who are already in healthy bodies, they're going, oh, it's coming up to summer, I better start dropping body fat. And it's like, you're going to go on holiday and you're going to have all the negative side effects that come with dieting because you dieted because you felt like you should, because that's what social media tells us to do. And so all of these things are not for me to kind of tell each individual person, but it's for me and my coaches to get someone to understand where that's come from themselves. And that just doesn't take 8 weeks. You just can't do it. Or for someone to say, oh, I recognize now that I overeat every time that I'm in the house on my own and I feel X, Y, or Z. So that it's like, okay, great. We've understood why you're doing it. Let's think about alternative strategies that we can put in place to stop that from happening. And again, that's not a quick fix.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you're right. Yeah, the 8 weeks, like, as if it's 8 week foundation, absolutely. But if it's solve all your life's problems in 8 weeks, it's definitely not.
Yeah, exactly.
I've actually seen you were posting recently as well on your own page about like purposely gaining weight yourself. How has that been received?
God, I sometimes talk about this on my own podcast, because people went wild when I said I wanted to gain weight. And this was quite a while ago now. I haven't purposely changed my body composition in a while, but my body composition has certainly changed. And whenever someone sees a picture of me from a different time, they're like, what did you do to get from there to here? And it's like, I just lived my life. I've probably lost a bit of muscle in the pandemic. I probably was anxious. I probably didn't eat much. But then there I was probably upset. And I remember I was eating loads. And that's why my body changes, because of natural fluctuations. But at the time, it was about 1.5 years or 2 years ago. I think it was about 2 years ago. And I genuinely just wanted to gain weight because I wanted to gain fat. It wasn't like I wanted to gain lean muscle. I wanted to gain body fat because I was in a healthy body, but I wanted to have a bigger arse and I wanted to have bigger boobs. Like, it was genuinely as shallow as that. And I told people, I said, like, yeah, I'm trying to gain a little bit of weight. I'm not tracking, but I just want to gain a bit of body fat. And the outrage that people felt, and every single day they were questioning, like, I don't mean to be funny, but you look great now. Why do you want to gain weight? Or I don't really understand. And it's like, because society, like, culturally, you have decided that everyone should want to be leaner. I think it's more attractive when I am a little bit fatter. I feel sexier when I'm a little bit fatter. I love to eat. And I think the guy at the time that I was into, I think we'd had this conversation and he was like, yeah, I think it's sexy when girls are a little bit bigger. Like, it was completely shallow. And like I say, it's not something that I'm doing now, but just people could not understand it. They genuinely, I think we're so naturally inclined, if we see two bodies, to think, well, the person who's leaner must be happier. The person who I'd much rather be like the person who's leaner. And we've got this kind of internalized weight bias, or internalized thin ideal, where we think that thinner means more successful, happier. And there's lots of research on this. Like, when you look at people and you ask them, like, people often think leanness just means a more positive, happier life. And so they don't always recognize that they're doing it. But when they see a leaner body, they automatically assume happier, healthier, more confident. And it's just not the case. That is just this weight bias that we have very much internalized because of the media for so long, mostly the media.
Yeah, that's fair. It's like sometimes it's like it almost offends people that someone in a bigger body could be happy and enjoying themselves and successful, isn't it?
Like, imagine that. Like, it's just, it's interesting, right? And I think it's all of our personal responsibilities to challenge our own narratives around it, because we can spend 20 years of our life trying to be smaller, and it's like, because you think smaller is going to be happier, and then you look back and you've spent 20 years of your life fighting miserably to get leaner, to try and find a happiness that you never got, when you could have spent those 20 years living your best life.
Yeah, that's true. Think I'd say as well, like I say, the reason you got such like backlash or response to you saying you wanted to gain weight, because I suppose they probably don't expect people to want to gain weight for aesthetic reasons.
Yeah, exactly that. But who are we to say what someone else looks better like, but B, what someone prefers? Like, I would never say to a woman, I like you better a different shape, ever, because it's not for me to have an opinion on someone else's body. I like my own body a little bit curvier because I feel better like that, but that's my own preference, and it's not for us to decide or assume where someone else feels happiest or healthiest. Someone hasn't let themselves go because they've gained weight. Like, they might actually be happier than they've ever been, and they've gained weight as a byproduct of that. Or vice versa, someone could be really going through a really anxious time and they've lost weight, and yet we assume that they're happier because they've lost weight. Like, it's not even wild, because we understand why it is, but we just have to be a little bit more accountable to it and question ourselves a little bit more on it.
Do you think people are a little bit too past remarkable on people's body shapes?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my friends posted a pregnancy picture recently, and the number of comments on it that were talking about the size of her bump and how it was admirable, she had a small bump and all this stuff. And I thought, the day that I get pregnant one day, if people start to say you're doing well because you've got a small bump, I think I will lose my mind. It just amazes me that people think it's okay to comment on someone's body in any way, shape or form. It's not helpful to them in any way. And to be honest, if someone complimented me, like, my favorite compliment ever is when people say, like, I love your energy, or like, that's, to me, that makes me so happy. And I think, I don't want someone saying, oh, your body looks great. Like, I mean, it's different, I think, if I'm in the bedroom with someone, I'm like, yeah, I'll take that. But basically, day to day, that's not what you want. You don't want to be known for your body. You want to be known for your brain and, like, your soul. And why do we feel it's okay to pass comment on someone's body? Like, just, we're existing, we're not asking for it. Doesn't matter what someone puts on social media, they're not asking for you to comment on their body. They're just living their life in their body, and that's what their body looks like. And that's certainly something that I've experienced on social media, where I've had backlash and I've had compliments on my body throughout times. And it's like, I got to a point where I thought, am I supposed to be hiding my body here so as not to get comments on it? Hiding my body here so as not to trigger anyone? And I think you have to take a step back and say, we're all just existing in our bodies. We're not asking, by existing in our bodies, to be commented on. You know, we don't put a picture up and ask someone to comment on our hair or our eyes or anything else. So why do we think it's okay to comment on bodies? And it's especially prominent for women, because ultimately, if we take it right back to its roots, it's because men like to have ownership. Again, not all men. Patriarchy likes to have ownership of our bodies, and the longer they comment on them, the more they feel that they have ownership on that. And again, I'm not talking about men, I am talking about patriarchy and the kind of structural system around that.
Yeah, I get you, I understand. That's crazy, people saying that's a nice small bump. Like, it's what? It's a big bump, just means a bigger child, isn't it?
I know, it just amazes me.
Yeah, that's crazy. I can't get my head around that. Like, I wouldn't have never thought, like, anyone who's pregnant, that will come to my mind. I'm like, oh, it's very neat looking, or it's very big. It's like, oh, look, they're pregnant.
But people do it, right? And exactly. Yeah. And they touch it, and they hope, like, they have opinions on what you should look like what size you should be, how much you should be eating, how much you should be exercising. And I mean, it's a process that I haven't gone through, and I can only imagine how much unsolicited advice you get in that situation. And I respect any pregnant woman who's gone through it so far, because it's, from what I see, it's just awful.
I suppose a lot of people like to give unsolicited advice when it comes to everything as well, though, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I suppose you mentioned media as well, like being like a cause of a lot of disordered eating. What will be kind of things that annoy you the most maybe in the media that you see? Start a list.
The week of Kim Kardashian, bless her. Do you know what? I think I'm not even really talking about her dress diet, because I don't think it's helpful necessarily to bring too much attention from it. In general, I think anything where any fads piss me off a lot. You know, there was someone recently that was a reality star, and she was talking about leggings that have like tinfoil inside them that make you sweat, that apparently help you spot reduce. Like stuff like that amazes me that it still goes on. I just think, how are we in 2022 and yet people are selling diet pills and sweatpants still? That amazes me. And I think that because of my echo chamber on social media especially, I don't see it as much. And then I'll see someone like share it on social media and I'll just think, like, that pisses me off. But I like to think that as a whole we're starting to know better, but we can't take away our desire for quick fixes. So that type of stuff really pisses me off. When it comes to social media, I think, to be honest, I think it's a couple of things. I think it's poor education. So something recently this morning what was annoying me was about coaches who talk about things like cheat meals, and there's some basics that support people's relationship with food that makes it worse. One of the things that makes it worse is dichotomous thinking about food. So good foods and bad foods, cheat meals, treat meals, these types of things. We know they contribute to disordered eating. So when I see PTs and coaches talking about stuff like that, that really riles me, because it's very 2014, like we should know better by now. So when coaches haven't made any effort to educate themselves and then go and talk about things that can contribute to people having worse relationships with food, that annoys me. It also gives me an insight into their coaching, which concerns me if that's what they put on social media. I think what I eat in a day posts are really toxic, because again, it just fuels food comparison. I think transformation pictures are really toxic. I think fake body positivity posts with lean girls are really toxic, because again, they highlight the focus on the body, and anything that's focusing on body or like how someone else looks and eats, I think is really toxic. So there are a lot of things, and I think it's really hard to navigate when you're just trying to find some helpful information to support yourself, when you've got diet culture or you've got anti-diet culture and you've got very little space for nuance in between. I think it's hard, and especially when health professionals are not necessarily as educated as they should be. And, you know, I'm not just talking about PTs, I'm talking about doctors who give out nutrition advice, which is just awful nutrition advice, but because they're medical doctors, people rate them. Like, that's really toxic. It's certainly not a PT thing. This is a kind of whole space problem, I think, that we have.
Yeah, no, I understand. Do you think as well, though, like say the PTs who are talking about cheat meals and stuff like that, like it might necessarily not be that they're ignoring it, but it's a reflection of their own issues that they have, that they, obviously, I'm a personal trainer, I can't have disordered eating patterns. But
because there's a lot of shame around it for sure, but a lot of people get into fitness and nutrition because they've got their own disordered eating habits in the first place, and that's a lot of the time why they become coaches. And that can both add empathy and compassion, and it can also add a lens where people can't then see outside of their own lens of their own experience, or it can contribute to people like knuckling down and like not allowing space for any sort of conversation about reality because they don't want to be outed as having these habits, which is why removing the shame from it is so important, and talking openly about it is so important. To say, you know, I work with a lot of personal trainers as clients, and it's okay to have struggles with your own relationship with food if you're working on those, and it doesn't make you a fraud for doing your job. It makes you a human being. And I think, especially fitness, we like to downplay disordered eating as if it's like some sort of minority, because it's safer than having to actually accept that a lot of your clients are experiencing it and you don't know what to do, and you're potentially experiencing it and you don't know what to do for yourself.
Yeah, I think as well, I say myself personally, when I first started, I felt like, you know, you could only show, you know, oh, I'm eating this salad or this omelette, and and then like you leave out all the burgers or the drinks and stuff like that because you're a personal trainer, you can't be doing that, and now I'm just like, when people say it, or I will talk to clients about going out drinking and stuff like that, and I'm like, look, it's normal, it's not wrong.
Yeah. And the thing is as well, like if we look at health outcomes, connection and social connection and or isolation are huge contributors to overall health and longevity. And it's like, if your social connection comes from going for dinner on a Saturday night and having a couple of glasses of wine with your mates, that is just as important for your health as you your vegetables all the other days of the week. And I think it's why it's so important. It's not, I think there was a really helpful push in the fitness industry to stop that kind of chicken and rice situation going on, and they said, you can still lose body fat and still go out with your mates and do all of these things, and I think that was really helpful. But I think we now need to move through that even more and say, I encourage you to not binge drink. I mean, you can if that's up your street, but it's obviously not healthy. But like, I encourage my clients to go on dates. I encourage my clients to eat pizza with their partners, because it's like, that is you relaxing, being present and enjoying time with your partner. We need to step away from damage limitation from going out to encouraging this as part of a healthful relationship with food and just health in general.
Do they struggle with that? Do they find it hard to just not care and do it? Or
some people do. I think if everyone who's ever dieted is super honest, could they say that they don't feel any anxiety about going out for dinner and having not seen the menu beforehand and not fall into a kind of screw it mentality when they do go out for dinner? I think it would be quite uncommon for people not to think that they have any sort of reservations around it. Or if someone said to them last minute after they'd had a big lunch, do you want to go out for dinner? How many people would say, actually, I feel comfortable with that, I'll just get something small, versus how many people would not want to do it at all because they'd already had a big lunch and they didn't think that they should have a big dinner. So I think it's probably more common. It's certainly not just my clients, and again, it's not all my clients either, some of them, but yeah, I think it's probably quite common.
Yeah. What are the biggest say recurring themes you find? Maybe, I know it's a spectrum, so there's different things, but is there something you see kind of regularly with people, or could it be anything really?
Yeah, so one of my kind of favorite things is when like I have email lists and stuff and people say it's like you're reading my mind, because to me that's super important as a coach, that you can understand exactly where your client is. But it's also because I hear it all the time, the same things coming up all the time. So it's things like, there's common things. There's things like being scared to deviate from MyFitnessPal. So if you're tracking, not knowing how to be flexible with that, and when you do kind of stray from that, going all out because you've kind of got a red number, so you just think, well, screw it, I'm just going to overeat. That's super common. People who overeat, especially at night, especially at the weekend, super common. And then obviously they kind of often will fall into that binge restrict cycle of restricting all day and then overeating at night, or restricting all week and then overeating at the weekend. The classic kind of inability to have unconditional permission to eat. So there's still dichotomous thinking around food. There's still certain foods that some people just don't eat. I remember working with someone once and it took them about 2 years to eat, I think it was a cinnamon roll or a croissant, that I haven't had this in 5 years, because they'd come through competing, and then it was just like, now it's a staple food. And so that's super common, this lack of ability to just relax and enjoy food. People not being regular with food, so people don't know how to be mindful with their food. They eat at their desks, they eat with their kids, or they eat off their kids' plates, and so they just generally just don't even know what healthful nutrition looks like. And I think that's quite a big issue that we have in the fitness industry in terms of what healthful nutrition is. And I think if you were to ask most personal trainers, do you cook with olive oil or do you cook with fry light? Do you eat 5% yogurt or do you eat 0% yogurt even when you're not dieting? Where that would be healthful choices of cooking with olive oil, for example, essential fats. We need them, we can't make them in our body. But how often are coaches and personal trainers talking about that side of things? Or how often are they just saying, just make smart swaps where you eat the lowest calorie option all the time? And that can create a lot of food fear for people. So it's again another really common one. And the other things are things like a lack of compassion for ourselves. Most clients who come to me hate the way that they eat, or they hate themselves for the way that they eat, or they feel like failures because they have no self-control, or what they feel is no self-control. And it's about bringing that compassion back in and understanding that that's healthful and not detrimental to your progress. And so that's another classic issue, I think.
Yeah, I find that the lack of compassion, I find that with the fitness as well, like, you know, clients, they like miss a session or something and it's like everything's wrong and you're like, no, you're fine. Like, you know, you haven't undone everything just by missing one day.
Exactly that. And a lot of that falls into that kind of perfectionist tendencies of like, if I can't do it perfectly, then I just won't do it. But that's one of the biggest reasons why you're not making progress in the first place, because you are trying to be perfect, and perfect doesn't exist. There's no way that you can be perfect for the next however many years of your life. It just doesn't exist. And so you will fail. And it's about saying, oh, I failed, I'm human. Okay, great. On to the next thing. Start again. Or not start again, just keep cracking on. And perfectionism is such a driver for stalls and progress. Again, that's often when we see like the binge restrictor trying to be so perfect and restricted during the week, and then just eating one slice of pizza and it's like, damn, you're just going all in.
Yeah. Do you have any like feelings towards people tracking their calories? Or
no, I think tracking is really helpful for some people, especially those who are trying to drop body fat or people who are trying to gain body weight. Tracking can be really helpful. Tracking is not a long-term strategy though, and I think that's the problem that we have. So if you can't track for the rest of your life, it's just not feasible. And if you feel dependent on tracking calories, then I think it's time to try and step away from it. Or if you are somebody who regularly overeats, then it's time to step away from it. Get consistent with your nutrition over time, and then maybe tracking might be better for you later down the line, or not. You know, I think tracking was so good when it first kind of people started using it, because it moved people away from meal plans. Like when I first fell into the industry, it was meal plans everywhere. They weren't talking about tracking macros, and tracking macros and flexible dieting was so important. And it went through that phase of everyone just trying to cram Pop-Tarts into their flexible diet, and that was not helpful, but it was important. It was needed to say you can have these foods and still stick to your macros and it's fine. So I do think that was needed. And then over time, we're a lot better with it now, and people tend to be a lot more flexible. We know that if you track your protein and calories, the rest is fine, and people are a lot easier with that. But now I think it's like, okay, we need to take the next step of saying that served a purpose. Maybe you really understand food now, you understand calories, you've lost body fat, you've developed all of these good habits, so let's rely on your habits now and take tracking away. I think that is really important, and I think that, again, if you're looking at short-term programs, it's certainly something that's missed.
Yeah, that's true actually, because I suppose if you've tracked for a while, you kind of start to learn to do things by eye as well. And if you're worrying if you've put 2 extra grams of rice in or something like that, you probably need to get that out of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I heard of a bodybuilder who would weigh his bagels, you know, like pre-packed bagels, and if it didn't weigh what it said on the packet, then he'd cut some off of it. And it's like, you're eating a pre-packaged bagel, it might be only like 5 grams different, but you'd cut that 5 grams off, and it's like, that's a problem. That is a poor relationship with food, and that we have to not normalize that. And you know, again, I'll work with clients who will weigh food that meticulously, and that is a problem, and we need to remove things. You shouldn't be weighing your food day in, day out. That's again not a way to live, and it's unnecessary as well.
Actually, as well, when you were saying about people like eating really well and just like eating everything at the weekend, I suppose you've probably heard the term of banking calories. Do you find that works at all, or?
I think it completely depends on your relationship with food. So something I teach in EIQ nutrition is the difference between proactive calorie cycling and reactive calorie cycling. For some people, proactive calorie cycling, where they bank 100 calories a day, say, not a ton amount, 100 calories a day, or say Monday to Friday, because they know they've got a wedding on a Saturday night and they want to relax a little bit, fine, crack on the Sunday, Monday, crack on like normal. Reactive calorie cycling is when you overeat at the weekend, so you reactively restrict all the way through the week, and then you overeat again at the weekend. Unhelpful. So if you've got a good relationship with food, I think proactive calorie cycling, where you bank a couple of hundred or some calories for the weekend or for an event, I think is fine, provided that you just move on. You are compassionate with yourself. You don't feel guilt and shame around it. And guilt and shame is one of the key indicators that it's something that's not helpful to you. If you feel guilt or shame around your eating, then that's disordered and it's something to work on. And that can come from that kind of banking of calories.
Yeah, I get that. I suppose, like you said, related to food, but you probably find people who cut it quite a bit.
Yeah.
And then goes off the...
Absolutely. Yeah, and they'll be eating 1,100 calories a day and then massively overeating at the weekend. Like, that's really unhelpful.
Yeah. Let me see. Is there like any kind of, I know you can't give blanket advice, but any advice for people who are kind of struggling with disordered eating, like to what they can do? Or like, I know, say for instance, maybe they feel like they can't afford to work with someone to help the problem at the moment. Is there anything maybe they can kind of do themselves?
I think it depends. Because disordered eating is so broad. It depends. But what, like, some basic things of understanding what your disordered eating habits are and understanding what purpose they're serving for you. So journal on them. Journaling is one of the best things you can do. So say, for example, it's overeating. Journal about what happened leading up to that event of you overeating, what you felt like after the event, and based on that, what you can do differently next time. Or if it is that you're stuck, addicted to tracking, not addicted, it's not the right word, but obsessed with tracking, figure out why. What purpose is that serving you? Because I feel like I need it to control my diet. Why do you need to control your diet? Why is that so important to you? Because I feel like uncertain in other aspects of my life. Okay, well, how can we create more certainty in other parts of your life? Or how can we get you to a point where you feel comfortable with a bit of uncertainty? Why do you feel that you need that control? What is it about uncertainty that you find so challenging? Which, of course, we all find uncertainty challenging, but for some people it can be more challenging. So I think the answer really is figuring out what it is and owning and accepting that, being kind to yourself about it, and then thinking, okay, well, why am I doing this? And what alternatives are there to replace that habit? And what actions can I take to do that? That's probably the most broadest sense of how you can start.
Yeah, I know it's you can't really give blanket advice anyway. Do you get a lot of pushback from people when you talk about journaling?
Sometimes. Most of the time, not so much now, because people know me. When they come to work with me, they know what I do by this point. So not so much. People don't really like to do it. I like to do it. Some people do when they get into the swing of it. But journaling forces you to feel your feelings. It forces you to get reflective. It forces you to stop ignoring what's going on. So a lot of the time people don't want to do it because it's uncomfortable. Sometimes we just don't want to do it because we just don't want to put that work in as well. But journaling is one of, like, I don't journal every day. I journal once or twice a week max. It's not something that you have to do all the time, but it's one of the most transformative things I think anyone can do to support their health, even if it's not disordered eating habits, even if it's just self-awareness and reflection and goal setting and gratitude and that type of thing. I think is so important.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm one of those people who's terrible at journaling. It'll happen at the start. Yeah, so I think that is everything I have to ask you, bar one question, and this is something I like to ask all my guests, and it's completely different to what we were talking about there, but what is the best advice that you've ever been given?
Oh gosh. This is tough. I think my favorite bit of advice is that actually everything is transient, and I've got it on my picture frame right next to my office desk. Everything is transient is, for me, really important. Recognizing that whatever it is that you're going through will pass. The highs will pass, the lows will pass. So if you're feeling the highs, like, take time to be grateful for them and love them and take them in and be present. And if it's the lows, allow it, because it will get better. with time. So I think that is probably my favourite bit of advice.
I think that's really good, actually, when you said like the highs will pass as well, because people always focus on getting stuck in the lows, but they never remember that the highs go through as well. Like,
yeah, exactly.
So I want to thank you as well for joining me today. Where can everybody find you?
Instagram is the best place. My Instagram handle is Emilia Thompson PhD, and my website is emilia.fitness. So either of those.
Brilliant. And yeah, just thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And just for anybody looking to find me, you will find me on Instagram and TikTok. It is at Chrissy H Fitness, and you will also find me on my website. It is www.chrissyhawkins.com. Thank you again for listening to the Why Not podcast. It really means a lot that you are listening in, and I would love if you could please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or subscribe on Spotify. And always, I'd love to hear feedback personally, so if you do want to leave me a message and let me know how you found the podcast, please do.